Good morning, everyone. So good to see you all here on a Saturday. Um, the name of our panel is very long, and I'll just get it complete. It's Social Media, AI, and Elections, Perspectives from the Global South on the Year of Democracy. And I think it's so important that we're going to discuss elections in the Global South, which is something that is not always discussed in festivals like this. And we have the best people here in the panel to discuss how is this information going to affect elections around the world, how is generative AI going to affect, how can we as journalists or data scientists or digital rights activists try to combat this information and get citizens to make informed decisions, work for information integrity. So here in the panel with me, I have, and I hope I'm not going to mispronounce your names, I hope. On my right, not ideologically, just on my right geographically, Thandi Bhengu. She's a data scientist working on civic tech. On my left, also not necessarily ideologically, Luis Fernando Garcia is a digital rights expert and human rights lawyer. And if you can talk a little bit about your organizations when you introduce yourselves. And here in the middle, Ika Ningtyas. She's a reporter and press freedom activist. So I would like to start with Ika. If you could talk about your organization a little bit, the Association of Journalists, and also Indonesia just had elections in February. South Africa is going to have elections in May, end of May, and Mexico in June. I see here colleagues from India, colleague from Brazil, colleague from Mexico. We all have elections this year. So if you could tell us a little bit, you've already had an experience of the use of generative AI during the electoral campaign. I would like you to tell us a little bit about your organization and what were the effects of the use in the campaign of the winning candidate, Prabowo.
Okay, thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Ika Ningtyas, Secretary General of the Alliance of Independent Journalists. And also I am coordinator fact check at Tempo. The organization is based in Jakarta, Indonesia. Yeah, for Indonesian context, yeah, we have a very, very different election that we compare with previous election because how the AI is a very influence our election. That's just not only about deepfake, but how the AI also facilitates, it's like the whitewashing strategy. Yeah, I know it's a very unpredictable before for us as journalists and also fact checker because we only prepare about how to handle about the deepfake. But after the campaigning steps that has happened, we are very shocking because how the campaigning strategy is very different that we imagining before. Okay, this is a background about the Indonesian election that you know that Indonesia as the third largest democratic countries. But the difference is for this year election, we have 55% as the youth voter or under 40 years old. Is a very different with the previous election because we have the elders voters. Why this is important? Because this is influence how the strategy of the political candidate to targeting of the youth voters during the election. And the second, this election, we had an increasingly on the TikTok users that you know that Indonesia is the second largest TikTok users after the United States. So the demography internet users in Indonesia moved from the Meta before, and we look at that more than 100 million users TikToks. It's really increasing the massively during the since the 2023 and then 2024. Yeah, so the political candidate is focusing on the TikTok as the campaign. And the thirdly, yeah, we know that AI is used commonly in Indonesia, not only for illustrator or for debunking process for the fact checking, but also so many netizens also use the AI, generate AI like the chat GPT or anything else. And the fault, because since 5 years ago, Indonesia had a declining democracy, and the current president is support his son to running with the candidate. Yeah, we have the problematic candidate in number 2. Is a combination the presidential candidate as the human right abuser from the 20 years ago. He is Ministry of Defense, but they asked the main perpetrator, the activist, human rights activist kidnapping in 20 years ago. And the vice president is the son of the current Indonesian president. Yeah, so the combination with the human rights violators and the political dynastic that we had. So it's like the very worst election that we had ever. The direct political campaigning is happened. Okay, in the second slide, you like how the generate AI based on image using from the candidate number 2. That the strategy is effectively, it's like a whitewashing strategy to can rebranding the candidate to winning of the election, because the Prabowo is the presidential candidate, has the loss of the running as a president twice in 2014 and 2019. But the February election, the result, his winnings of the election, yeah, that's we know that this is one of strategy how the candidates gain the footers of the youth, and they making the conversation is not only about the human right as well, but also how they can choose transforming the public debates, not just about the human right as well, but they can choose success to making the election is very entertain. It's like the entertainment as well. Yeah, we call that the strategy campaigning is like they call gemoy. Gemoy is the slang words in Indonesia. That's meaning is cute or cuddly. And yeah, cuddly grandpa, because he's a president. He's this president of the age around 70 years old. Yeah, so we call it is like cuddly grandpa. Yeah, so on the TikTok, if you can check with several keywords. That's the kind of the campaign is get a very highly engagement with million reaction, million of the positive comment, and they can share again with their college. Yeah, so this is very unpredictable that we had before, and we, if we looks and the discussing on the TikTok about the human right abusing that president have the bad experience before, is not appear as the public debate or the mainstream debate on the TikTok. Yeah, so all the political campaign is like entertainment. It's like the funny political aspect. Yeah, so that it can choose very successful to can gather the youth generation. Yeah, so I think it's like will be the new trend in the future, and how the journalists and fact checkers as well to can handle, because I am as a fact checker is cannot to debunk selected, because it's not like in disinformation, but the kind of a manipulation, information manipulation. And in the context, because about the democracy values, about the human right values is not taught. It's not taught well in the school. Yeah, so the youth didn't know about the history well, about the human rights issues, and what importance of human rights and democracy and the integrity of the election. Yeah, so we have gap about knowledge, we have gap about the political education as well for the youth. Yeah, maybe it's a brief.
Sure, this is so
Sorry.
interesting. I mean, we've all been focusing on the use of generative AI in deep fakes, deepfake audio, and this is actually not actual disinformation, but just like a brand washing of a candidate who has been known to be a human rights violator during the dictatorship, and now he reinvented himself as the chubby grandpa, cuddly grandpa, with the help of AI and conquering the youth vote. And I think in the Philippines, this was, I'm not sure if it was generative AI, but they also managed to sort of rebrand Bongbong Marcos' history.
But it's not using
As
the
a-
strategies
not
like
AI,
that.
yeah,
Yes,
not AI, not AI.
Yes.
But this, I mean, it's interesting how we're not thinking about, this other uses to have a new narrative,
Yep.
right? And I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm awful. My name is Patricia Campos Mello. I am a journalist from Brazil. I work for Folha de Sao Paulo. That's a leading newspaper. I've been covering disinformation influence operations for several years. And we also in Brazil have elections this year, municipal elections in over 500 cities, and we have seen very close the effects of manipulation of information and disinformation enabled by social media specifically on January 8th, 2023, when there was a coup attempt, a very violent attack against Brasilia that was organized and amplified by social media. So sorry I did not introduce myself. Good. Thandi, we were talking about how there's this hype about AI, and in our country and in several other countries, there's still a basic need for information. It's not even like, artificial intelligence or manipulation of information. People don't have access to primary information, which is needed if you don't have this symmetry of information that every citizen can have all the data to decide. So your organization, if you could talk a little bit about your organization and the work you're doing to ensure people have access to basic data.
Thank you, Patricia. Hello, everyone. I'm Thandi Bhengu from South Africa. I work for an organization called Open Cities Lab. We are a civic tech organization, and we're a non-profit, non-partisan organization. We work on tools and interventions that strengthen government capacity, empower citizens, and improve trust, and therefore strengthening democracy. So, thanks for the question, Patricia. Yes, AI, all of this AI buzzword, it is very emotional and provocative, and it's very exciting, and it's really amazing in that it drives a lot of engagement or participation between the public and governments, and it's allowing sort of governments to reach larger audiences, spread campaigns and that, but it also is kind of dangerous in that in regions that have frail information systems, that's where the fire can sort of be uncontained and misinformation can be shared. So OCL's primary concern is to strengthen information systems in our country, but also in other regions. And we do this by working with municipalities, other NGOs, community-based organizations, a lot of public participation, citizen participation. And we aim to create robust, reliable data sources. This can be from municipalities, so sometimes we are working with municipalities to create open data portals where municipalities can share information with stakeholders. Sometimes that would be other citizens or that would be funders, other cities, that kind of thing. Okay, we'll get there. Sometimes it can look like digitizing paper-based solutions, and so that would be like heavy participation with communities. We do a lot of community-based monitoring, and so where information is collected and stored and retrieved via paper, we provide digital solutions, and therefore data is structured, it's easy to visualize, it's easy to share, it's easy to store. And sometimes it can look like structuring data that is already available and existing, that governments are putting out for public engagement, but maybe this data exists in pages and pages of PDFs, and it is very difficult and time-consuming for anyone to go and get answers, and it requires some intervention to be able to, maybe synthesize a 100-page document into a two-page dashboard for quick decision-making and insights. So with OCL, our focus is to provide reliable, single sources of truth that where in situations where we have, misinformation, disinformation, all of these changed narratives, there are pillars of information that are reliable, that the state and citizens can look to be able to fact check, corroborate, and just stay strong in the truth, essentially.
Great. It's interesting how we're discussing AI and the use of AI in elections, and the colleague Ritu Kapoor, she mentioned in one of her panels that we are having elections now. I mean, India ends in June, you guys May, February, June. The advance of the AI tools is going to be continuous, so who knows what's going to be happening at the end of the year, how really advanced and undetectable these tools are going to be. And in the case of Mexico, that is already a country with serious challenges for digital rights activists and journalists who are being, threatened, assassinated, and spied on. How is this going to make things work? I'm sounding really grim here, right? Sorry. But maybe, and also, how can AI help you guys combat these challenges against journalists and human rights activists?
Well, thank you first for the invitation. I'm Fernando Garcia, and I'm the director of R3D, which is a digital rights organization from Mexico. And I'm going to jump off a little bit from the AI hype train, and just remind everyone that threats to democracy are not attributable to a single technology. There are several problems with democracy right now that go way beyond generative AI. The rise of authoritarianism, militarization, organized crime, massive surveillance. There's several things that are going on that we should not forget. And this is not to dismiss the risks and the threats that AI pose to our societies, but to also give context and to make sure that we don't forget that also that there's no single and simple fixes to the issues that we're facing. And in the context of Mexico, from where I come from, I mean, recently an investigation from a really good organization that we work with, Data Cívica in Mexico, in an investigation called Voting Among Bullets, Votar Entre Balas, have documented that in the last 6 years there's been 1,777 attacks on either candidates, on political figures, on public officials, on electoral authorities, and over 1,000 killed, injured, kidnapped, or disappeared persons in that political context. So the political violence in Mexico is, and not only in Mexico, in several places, it's very prevalent. Mexico in the last 6 years during this government has almost 50 journalists killed related to their journalistic work. There's other phenomena like militarization. Currently in Mexico, the military controls and has unprecedented power, not only controls public safety, the intelligence agencies, but now controls roads, customs, airports, ports, builds trains, refineries, has an airline, has tourist attractions, makes business as a bank. All that power also taking into consideration the collusion that exists not only in Mexico but in several places, particularly in Latin America, between organized crime and the state, poses several challenges to democracy, on top of which several investigations that we've made, for example, we've documented in Mexico for years the use by the military of the Pegasus software against journalists, human rights defenders, with total impunity. Totally, there's no accountability for that, even though the evidence is overwhelming. We recently published another investigation about that we called Army of Bots, Ejército de Bots, which documents how the Army has a whole center called the Center for Operations of Cyberspace, that among the things that they do, they have software and equipment that helps them create a network of inauthentic accounts to push the narratives that are favorable to the government, to attack journalists and human rights defenders who challenge the power that the Army is amassing in Mexico. There's also networks of inauthentic accounts from both the government and the opposition party, so all this disinformation and manipulation techniques are really widespread and normalized among the whole political spectrum. It's also unclear how data collection from governments that is used to provide public services and other surveillance technologies such as facial recognition in public spaces are being used or are going to be used during the elections to do manipulation or could do in the future. So it's important to understand that the threat to democracy and disinformation in itself, it's a complex phenomenon. It's not recent, not explained by a single technology, by one state actor, by one company or set of companies, that there are no easy fixes, that yes, this is not to discourage the work that everyone is doing and we are doing, promoting accountability and transparency of governments, of big tech, pushing for regulation that also ensures that there is transparency and accountability, but also that we should think about not only challenging and thinking about regulation of, for example, AI in abstract, but also regulation and enforcement and other activism that challenges the current wild surveillance business model on top of which disinformation thrives. And that if we don't start addressing that infrastructure that provides both massive surveillance, which also, with the rise of authoritarians in many places in the world, gives people the opportunity and governments the opportunity to exert more control over populations and to dismantle democracy. We push all that, it's really important. And finally, just also caution, because we need to understand this context, because sometimes when we talk about regulation, like an easy fix for a lot of things, we don't think about the institutional weakness that many countries have, the fact that we can create, for example, and this has happened, institutions that, and also governments and authoritarians are using this language of regulation to give themselves power, for example, to censor, to control speech, to suppress dissent. And even if right now your country is democratic and you feel, yeah, it's fine, we can trust that there's going to be an agency that's going to say what is true and what is false. The next government cannot be democratic, can be authoritarian, and have all these tools in place to make democracy very difficult for everyone. No? So also caution on this discussion, and understand that it's a complex issue. Let's not get away from it, but let's demystify it and get into the details, because these generalizations sometimes can be harmful, no, as well.
This is so interesting. I mean, we've all been discussing the need to hold tech platforms accountable and the way they don't have incentives to combat disinformation because there's no accountability. But at the same time, we need to be careful about what kind of regulation you end up having and what kind of governments are working, what are the purposes. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more in the specific case of Mexico, how the government or some political actors have been trying to weaponize regulation, to say we're combating disinformation, but actually they're trying to enact regulation or create agencies that are going to end up working as censors or arbitrary mediators of the information ecosystem.
Well, there's already lots of powers that have been given to the electoral authority in Mexico to suppress speech online. that we're currently investigating. We have an investigation called Censura Electoral, electoral censorship, which we have already evidence that it's been abused to suppress speech that is totally legal, part of a democracy. And there's several law proposals, legal proposals that are, for example, pushed by the army, by the way, to legitimize these operations, influence operations, and to legitimize and give, to create a new cybersecurity agency, for example, that has powers to censor speech, to combat disinformation, to do surveillance, and to normalize all this infrastructure that can be easily manipulated for authoritarian purposes. But it's not only in Mexico. There are several places in which this has happened. It has happened in India, it has happened in Hungary, it has happened in many places in which structures and infrastructure that is built sometimes for other purposes, for example, and for this, AI is also an issue that is really important. Not because AI, this is also a caution, AI is being promoted as this very effective tool. Many times it's not the case. Those who want to attract funds to develop this technology overhype also the effectiveness of these tools. But that shouldn't make us feel safer, in the sense that at the same time that it's very ineffective in many ways, it's very confident. It's super confident, and people who implement it still implement it with a lot of confidence and creates harms, even though technology is not really there. And we should also think about AI beyond, for example, generative AI, or get away from this existential threat narrative that many in the AI and big tech world are trying to distract us from. The real, actual, right now effects of many of these technologies, like the power surveillance, social ranking in many places, or predictive policing, or biometric identification, facial recognition, surveillance, that are right now being weaponized against the centers, against opposition, against the population in general, and that pose real threats that we should be addressing, and that, for example, regulation that's been touted as really important in Europe, for example, leave totally out of, and that those are the red lines that we should be paying attention to as well, and being very cautious of these tools. But yeah, I hope I answered that question.
You did. It's interesting to think, I mean, the regulation that sometimes will work in the European Union is not necessarily the one that's going to work in our specific countries, because it depends on each government, and on top of all, it's not a silver bullet. It's not one thing that's going to work. Ika, you were telling us about this innovative use of generative AI to rebrand the candidate. As a fact checker and a journalist, I mean, fact checkers are journalists, so as both. Yes. What have you been seeing? What have you saw in this election in terms of new models of disinformation or the use of AI? And how did you try to detect and combat these new kinds of disinformation?
Okay, as I mentioned before, that very difficult for fact checker to can handle the kind of the avatar campaigns like that as a new strategy to whitewashing. Yeah, so it's depend on how the media, independent media, can to produce a good journalism to can, tracking behind of the who's the team creating of this strategy, how they can to produce this strategy, and how the tools or AI can to influence the citizen. But I concerned about how the responsibility of the AI companies. As you know that AI generate images that was created by Midjourney. Midjourney is yes. Midjourney is AI companies that based in the United States, that you check in the term of services of the Midjourney, they has declared that it's still banned for the political campaigning purposes. But the implementation, as the example from the Indonesian case, so its rule is not enforceable well and not clear, and how they can to monitor about the implementation of their policy to outside the country of the United States. Yeah, so it's like the commonly problem on our social media and our big companies on AI, that's the lacking of the responsibility to control their tools can be influencing in outside or far away from the companies, and they didn't have anything to can combat or have a responsibility to can making the democratic process well in Indonesian context. And thirdly, yeah, I think we should too careful if we want to have a regulation approach, because in the context authoritarianism countries like Indonesia, that very easy for government to can weaponize of the regulation. And also about AI. Yes, that's Indonesian currently is discussing about the regulation to regulate of the AI, but it's still very beginning to can have a good regulation. So we push as like a more researcher to including to know about how the implementation of AI during our election, because with research base, it will be help the government or the other stakeholders to understanding well about the influencing of the AI during the election. Yeah, so I think we need as like the holistic approach you can handle of the AI in the future.
And your government just implemented or announced legislation to news compensation and fake news. Is that dangerous? Because everything is in there, right?
Yeah, Indonesia is very challenging because we have a new legislation about the fake news article, but the definition is not clear and very rubber article that can silence of the journalists and also digital human rights or the person who have the critical about public policy on the digital space. Yeah, so very we need to careful to agree about the regulation approach, because in the context maybe in Mexico and Brazil, in Indonesia, the government is really easy to can weaponize for silencing of freedom of expression.
And I guess the flip side that you also mentioned is that the tech platforms, they have their own rules, their own terms, but they don't enforce them as well in developing countries as they do in the global north, so to say. And in some places they just translate the civic engagement laws, rules, and they're not really enforcing. So that's also the flip side, because they say we're self-regulating, but they're not really self-regulating because they are not enforcing their own rules. Thandi, your organization is also doing awesome work in empowering, journalists and citizens in data literacy, in fact-checking. Can you talk a little bit about this work and why it is important during elections and in general?
Sure. So yes, we have a project called Africa Data Hub, and this is what you're seeing on your screen. It's funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And that kind of came about during COVID, when we were seeing a lot of information, a lot of dashboards that were showing a lot of what was happening with the virus in the north, or the first world, and weren't getting a lot of information around what's going on in Africa. And so it is a collaboration between us and journalists, newsrooms around Africa, and we have worked together to build capacity. We do some trainings with data journalists to be able to create products, dashboards, or sources of information that can sort of be used to give factual stories, to share, factual information. So if you click on this QR code, you will go to the platform where you'll see the products that we've developed together with journalists in Africa. And we also have some trainings available there, some resources for data journalists to be able to increase data literacy. And then we also have some fellowship opportunities. So if there is, I don't know, anything that sort of speaks to you as a journalist, or any issues that you're having in your region and you want to reach out, you're able to do that. So that is our project that deals mainly with data journalists, and sort of building capacity there with journalists. In terms of an example of elections and strengthening public participation or transparency in terms of elections. If we could go to the next slide. We have this product, My Candidate Africa, but if we could first go to My Candidate, the next one, please. Yes, My Candidate South Africa in 2021. This is an example where we have open information, or we have our IEC releases information on candidates, which is publicly available for everyone. These lists are long PDFs, and so it's hard for citizens to make decisions on which candidate is right for them. And so this was kind of a gap that OCL sort of found, and our response to that was this platform, where it was a very simple little thing where you put your address in. So 2021 was the local elections. So you put your address, and then you get back a list of candidates who are running in your ward, and with a little bit of information around their age, the different wards that they're running for, and with the hope that that would sort of guide citizens or residents in terms of, maybe they don't want to vote for a 90-year-old person, or, maybe, if somebody is running for too many wards, maybe that's a red flag, depending on, what people's interests are. And that was really great. We got a lot of public sort of engagement through the use of Twitter, actually, and yeah, so that was in 2021. Since then, we can go back now to My Candidate Africa. That has now sort of been iterated and applied in different countries. We have Kenya iteration, Zimbabwean iteration, and Sierra Leone. We are currently working on the release of the South African one for our upcoming elections in May. The candidate list has recently been released, and it is still being finalized by the IEC. And so once we have the absolute final list, then My Candidate South Africa will go live. And that is just an example of a tool where we have existing information out there, but it's not easy to read, it's not easy for people to engage with and make decisions, and sometimes you just need to sort of restructure it, and be able to, and then you're able to make decisions more accessible to everyone. So yeah, that's an example of what we're doing to sort of open up information regarding elections, and then also just have a source of truth for data journalists or journalists to look to.
Wonderful. Thank you, Thandi. We're going to open up for questions from the audience. If you guys can identify yourselves. I think there's a gentleman here.
Mohammed Munir, Editor-in-Chief, Middle East Business. How can journalists and independent journalists and small media outlets safeguard themselves against misinformation in today's highly digital and interconnected world? Thank you.
Who wants to take this one?
Okay, because my organization have around 2,000 journalists member. Yeah, so ahead of the election in 2023, we train 100 of the journalists in national and also both in the local with the skill how they can choose debunks on mis and disinformation, and also we train about the deepfakes as well, because we has noticed that we receive views of the deepfake, but not all the local journalists especially have the skill and knowledge how to debunk. Yeah, so the project is large of the all the national project you can train, and we have like a mentoring from the senior fact checkers. They can to help the junior fact checkers, and also we have a collaboration, national collaboration among 20 media outlets, and also the several civil society. We working together during the election to handle all the mis and disinformation, including the deepfake. Yeah, that's one of the strategy how we can to have a transfer knowledge and skill to prepare for our election.
Great. Any questions? Sure.
Maybe a provocation as well. I think it's important to understand that disinformation, being a complex issue, or to ask ourselves, why does a person trust more an anonymous WhatsApp message rather than what the government's saying or what your media organization is saying? And to really everyone look at themselves and see why the public has lost the trust. And sometimes it's not your fault. Sometimes it's very powerful people and institutions trying to convince people to not trust anyone but themselves. But also I think, again, disinformation is not a new issue. It's not something that came up with the internet. When I was growing up in Mexico, there were just 2 TV channels. They were all aligned with the official, what the government said. So I knew from my childhood, like, the TV news is lying to me. I'm not going to trust them. And now they're asking my trust and not to trust the WhatsApp message. So there's a responsibility that also media has in how trust was lost, and also an opportunity of how trust can be regained. And think about how can I make my audiences trust me? How can I be more transparent about my finances, about my editorial decisions? There's a role that media has to play in rebuilding the trust that makes people go away from trusting anonymous WhatsApp messages and start trusting. And there's also a state responsibility. Disinformation also thrives on the lack of official information. We see this a lot in Mexico, for example, in the migration context. Migrants don't have official information deliberatively about how to get access to, for example, temporary visas. And that's when disinformation thrives and puts migrants in danger, etc. So there's several factors to this. We just wanted to give that.
No, that's super healthy to listen from non-journalists, because we also have to get better and improve and not only blame governments or tech platforms. Thank you for that. I think we have one question there and one here.
Thank you. What strikes me about the Indonesian case is that even if those images are labeled as generated by AI, it doesn't reduce their impact at all. Which brings me to the point that no matter what generative AI you're going to use, or anybody's going to use, they still need to distribute the products. And that points us to curational and ranking AI in the distribution systems. And the kind of ranking that people will see in their feeds is not going to be purely organic, that people like cuddly pictures of the candidate. It's what the algorithm is going to spin, but the algorithm could also do something else. It could give prominence in the feed to sites like Thandi's site. It could give prominence to the electoral management body so that people get a mix. But isn't the question then, how do you get electoral regulation or distribution platform agreement that actually they're going to make a contribution to the election? And the contribution is not just that they will try and label what is AI generated, but in the use of AI in the feeds, they will try to actually support the integrity of the election more broadly and not just give whatever content is going to get them attention.
Can you identify yourself, Guy?
I'm Guy Berger, and I worked at UNESCO for 11 years until I retired last year.
So it's interesting. I'm not sure who wants to take not only generative AI, but the algorithms and how they are.
Yes, I'm agree about that because we look at how, especially on TikTok, because they're spreading, it's like a tsunami wave onto TikTok. But you know that TikTok didn't anything during the our election. And I said to Meta or TikTok that, yeah, you all is a fail to anticipate or mitigate about the kind of the trends because they didn't have any policy about the using the AIs like this to our campaigns. As you TikTok mentioned that they bans of the it's like the political campaign or the political content, but you know that so many content about the political messages and the political strategy on their platform. But yeah, as I mentioned that the platform have a low responsibility and lacking about how they can to monitor the enforcement the rule as like an Indonesia process. Yeah, so the problem is, I think, is when so many countries face the same problem, but how we can choose social society in Indonesia can to handle the new trends like that. We're trying to have the coalition on content moderation. The coalition is a very diverse civil society, around 12 civil society, and based on journalism, digital activists, and scientists as well. Yeah, we're creating this coalition to can have dialogue, have the regular advocacy to a platform to can handle not only mis and disinformation, but also about any things that can influence of the digital space in Indonesia. And this coalition also trying to advocating to the Ministry of Communication and Information that's handle about the content moderation. Yeah, so we look at to new strategy as well, how the civil society and journalist associations like that I manage now can work together to can handle all the problem on the digital rights issues.
Want to add something, Thandi?
I think, there is also responsibility for big tech to, sort of come to the party. And I am aware that Meta and the IEC in South Africa are in conversation around the spread of misinformation in the elections. So there are some, misinformation campaigns, social media literacy trainings that are being undertaken by Meta because, yes, we, X, Facebook, WhatsApp are huge vessels of information sharing and campaign sharing, and these accounts can be, we have government officials with accounts that share information. We have, public officers that share information on these platforms, and so it is also up to Meta or these social media companies to participate in regulating the sharing of information, misinformation, and create policy that protects information in these election processes.
Thank you. We have time for one last very quick question and very quick answer. I think this lady here. 1 minute, okay, 1 minute. So 30 seconds for the question and 30 seconds for the answer.
I will try to be very brief. I'm Beatrice and I work from my school's journal. And I saw recently that there are some AI-generated videos that seem really, really human, that seem really, really real. And I want to ask you if there's any way that we can suppress like AI to not mislead us and misinformate us from the reality.
Thank you. Who's going to do the 15-second answer?
I hope so. No, there are people also. AI is not only. It's also helping other people catch this information as well. Yeah, I cannot get into much more than that, but it's a challenge. That's the challenge that you are placing. It's a challenge and a question that everyone's trying to answer in the world. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.